Have you ever noticed how just one sentence from someone else can ruin your entire day? A glance, a tone of voice, comment you weren't ready for. It's like they reached inside and pulled a lever marked anger or insecurity, and suddenly, your whole sense of peace disappears. But here's the paradox. What if that lever was never theirs to pull? What if all along it's been yours? In this video, we'll journey through 7 Buddhist teachings, each one a quiet doorway back to yourself, back to calm, back to sovereignty. We'll start today with a truth so simple, it may shift how you relate to every voice around you. And in Chapter 6, there's a moment that might surprise you, a teaching that shows how true wealth isn't about money at all, but about freedom from the mindset of lack, and how silence can open that door. If that kind of journey speaks to your heart, you're warmly invited to subscribe not just to a channel, but to a path. One that returns you, again and again, to the most powerful place you can ever stand, within. So, shall we begin? Chapter 1, The Myth of Control. No one can make you feel anything. I used to think I was strong, until one sentence from someone I barely knew could ruin my whole day. You've probably felt it too. Someone cuts you off mid-sentence, rolls their eyes, or throws a careless comment your way. And suddenly, as if someone pressed a button inside your chest, a wave of heat rises. Your jaw tightens, your heart beats a little faster, your stomach churns. It's almost like they reached inside and pulled a lever marked anger. But what if they didn't? What if that lever is ours and always has been? This realization didn't come to me through a book or a motivational quote. It arrived one quiet evening in a dusty old Buddhist monastery, tucked in the hills just beyond Chiang Mai. I had traveled there after a season in my life that had left me raw. Relationship stress, work pressure, and that creeping sense of not being enough no matter how much I did. The abbot, an older monk with laugh lines that hinted at decades of inner peace, sat with me under a Bodhi tree as the sun filtered softly through the leaves. He said something I'll never forget. Not because it was profound in words, but because it was profoundly simple. He smiled and said, "Anger is not in their mouth. It is in your mind." First, I didn't get it. I protested in my mind. But they said that. They hurt me. They made me feel this way. But the more I sat with it, the more the truth of it began to settle, like leaves drifting slowly to the ground. You see, we've all been taught, subtly or directly, that our emotions are reactions to what others do. That if someone yells, we must defend. If someone criticizes, we must shrink or strike back. But the Buddha offered a radically different path. One that says, you are not a slave to the world around you. You are the keeper of your own inner kingdom. There is a well-known teaching where the Buddha was insulted by a man in public. The man shouted angrily, hoping to provoke a response. But the Buddha simply looked at him with calm eyes and asked gently, if someone offers you a gift and you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong? The man was stunned. The Buddha's teaching was clear. The insult, like a gift, only has power if you accept it. That, my friend, is emotional sovereignty. But let me tell you, it's not easy. It takes practice. It takes a kind of mindfulness that isn't just about watching your breath in a quiet room, but watching your heart in the middle of a storm. I remember one woman I met during a retreat who embodied this wisdom. Her name was May, and she carried a calmness that felt like a still lake. During one session, a man in the group rudely interrupted her and belittled her opinion in front of everyone. I watched her carefully in that moment. She paused, smiled softly, and said, "Thank you for sharing. I'll reflect on that." Later, I asked her how she managed to stay so calm. She chuckled and said, "Oh, it wasn't easy. I felt my hands get cold. My breath shortened. But then I remembered his words are his. How I carry them is mine." She wasn't suppressing her feelings. She was simply choosing her response. That's the quiet power of Buddhist insight. It doesn't ask us to deny our humanity, but to refine it. And that brings me to you. Maybe you've been holding on to someone else's words like they're a part of your identity. Maybe a sentence someone said years ago still echoes in your mind, shaping how you see yourself. If so, I want to gently offer this. You can let go. You are not their words. You are not their mood that day. You are not what they said in anger. You are the space in which all of that happened. The awareness that noticed it. The breath that still rises and falls. When we realize this, something subtle shifts. We stop being tossed around by the emotional winds of others. We plant our roots deeper. There's a meditation practice I've returned to time and again when I feel stirred up by what someone has said. It's simple, but it works. I close my eyes, breathe slowly, and repeat. This emotion arose within me. It is not who I am. I can hold it without being held by it. The feeling doesn't always disappear, but it softens. It becomes a visitor, not a squatter. And sometimes just that little space between the trigger and the response is all we need to choose peace over reactivity. You might wonder, but what if the words were truly cruel? Yes, words can hurt, and we do need boundaries. But even then, especially then, the power is in choosing how to respond. Not as a victim of someone else's storm, but as a mindful witness of your own weather. I once heard a monk describe the heart like a garden. If we let every passerby throw trash into it, soon it becomes polluted. But if we tend to it daily, clearing weeds, planting seeds of compassion, letting the sun of mindfulness shine, then even if someone tosses in something sharp, it won't take root. It will land on soft, fertile ground and slowly dissolve. It's not about building walls. It's about nurturing strength from within. And honestly, in today's world, so loud, so reactive, so quick to judge, this inner steadiness is more than just spiritual. It's essential. It's what allows us to love without losing ourselves, to speak truth without shouting, to be present even when the world feels unkind. So next time someone says something that jolts you, try this. Pause, breathe, ask, what part of me is reacting? Then gently remind yourself, I am not their words. I am the awareness that sees them. You might still feel a sting. That's okay. You're human, but you're also more than that. You're a whole sky, not just a passing storm. And if today that's hard to believe, then just start by sitting still, closing your eyes, and watching your breath for a minute. That simple act, repeated with sincerity, is how emotional freedom begins. Like a lotus blooming quietly at dawn, unseen by the world, yet fully awake. I'll meet you there, in the silence between thoughts, in the pause before reaction, in the gentle knowing that we hold the key to our own peace. And no one, not even their harshest words, can take that away from us. Chapter 2. The Fire Within, Breathing Light into Anger, a Buddhist Teaching for Morning Meditation. I used to believe I was a calm person until I became a parent. There was a morning that still lives in my chest. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the house was quiet, cloaked in that blue-gray stillness just before dawn. My little boy, no older than 6 at the time, was struggling with something as small and monumental as tying his shoes. And there I was, barely awake, coffee untouched, already late, and I felt it rise. That heat in the belly, that storm in the throat, the familiar fire, and just like that, calm slipped through my fingers like mist. Why does something so small awaken something so big? The truth is, anger is not bad. It's not something we need to banish or be ashamed of. It's energy, raw, powerful, and deeply human. What we do with that energy, that's where the path diverges. That's where transformation begins. In Buddhism, there's a saying, it is not the breaking of the cup that makes us angry. It is the belief that it should not have broken. That one line has walked with me ever since I heard it. I think about it whenever I hear a door slam, a sharp word fly, or when my own breath shortens and I feel that pressure rising in my chest. It's not the event that disturbs us, but our story about how it should have gone. The expectation, the illusion of control. So many of our emotional storms come not from reality, but from our resistance to it. Imagine a quiet Zen garden, smooth white sand raked into flowing lines, a single stone resting peacefully at the center. Now picture a leaf falling, just one. Most of us, without mindfulness, would flinch. It shouldn't be there, our mind whispers. But the leaf is not the problem. Our rejection of it is. Anger works the same way. That morning with my son, my anger wasn't about shoelaces. It was about my desire for things to be easy, fast, on schedule. When reality didn't meet my unspoken demands, I felt betrayed, and instead of softening, I burned. But here's the thing I've learned from Buddhist teachings, and from many quiet mornings of sitting with my own fire. Anger is a messenger, not a monster. It comes to tell us something. Maybe it's pointing to a boundary crossed. Maybe to pain we've buried. Maybe it's just revealing a moment we wanted to control and couldn't. When I think of anger now, I imagine a small flame cupped in two hands. It can warm, or it can burn. What matters is how gently we hold it. There is a practice I turn to, especially during the early hours, when the world is still sleepy and the mind hasn't yet filled with noise. I call it breathing light into the fire. Here's how it goes. When I feel anger stirring, tightness in the jaw, heat behind the eyes, I pause. I don't try to push it down or label it as wrong. I let it be there. I breathe into it, slowly, with kindness. Inhale. I feel the flame. Exhale. I give it space. It's not suppression. It's not indulgence. It's witnessing, just like watching clouds pass over a quiet temple roof. Anger, like everything else, is impermanent. When we stop feeding it with stories, it starts to cool on its own. When we stop grasping at how things should be, we can finally meet things as they are. There's a Zen tale that captures this beautifully. A monk is serving tea. Someone bumps the tray, and the cup crashes to the ground. Another monk shouts, "Why weren't you more careful?" The first monk bows and says softly, "It was the cup's time to fall. Simple, gentle, no resistance, no rage." It wasn't that the cup didn't matter. It's that the monk knew peace is worth more than being right. That's the wisdom we can carry with us, not just into meditation cushions or temples, but into kitchens and classrooms and morning commutes. A friend of mine, Michael, shared with me his own story. He was a single dad raising two kids, balancing two jobs. His mornings were chaos. Cereal spilled, socks lost, someone always forgetting something. One day, his daughter knocked over orange juice, again onto a stack of important papers. He felt it coming, the heat, the shout, the blame. But then, he remembered the breath. Instead of yelling, he looked at her. Her eyes were already bracing for his reaction. He saw fear, he saw guilt, and then he saw himself. How many times he had spilled something in his own life and wished for softness. He took one long, slow breath, then another, and finally he smiled. "It's okay," he said, grabbing a towel. "We've got paper towels stronger than orange juice today." She blinked in surprise, then laughed. The tension broke. A memory formed, not of anger, but of grace. Later, he told me that moment changed how he saw himself. Not as someone trying to not be angry, but as someone learning how to meet anger differently. That's the heart of the practice. We're not trying to erase emotion. We're learning to relate to it with curiosity, not judgment. With tenderness, not shame. Anger doesn't have to be the villain. It can be the signal flare that guides us home, to our values, our wounds, our unmet needs. Sometimes, anger says, "This matters," and that's a gift. The Buddha once described anger as a burning coal we hold in our hands, intending to throw it at someone else. But we are the ones who burn first. What if, instead, we placed that coal on the ground, knelt beside it, and watched its warmth? What if we learned from it? One of the most powerful tools I've found is to name the emotion softly when it arises. Not as "I am angry," but "there is anger." That little shift makes all the difference. Creates space. Instead of being the flame, we become the one watching the flame. From that place, we can ask, what's behind this feeling? What expectation am I clinging to? What can I choose now that will lead to peace rather than regret? There's a gentle kind of power that comes from choosing how to respond. Not from force, but from clarity. That's what Buddhist practice offers us. A pause, a breath, a way to let the fire become light. Sometimes, in my morning meditations, I imagine a candle in the dark. At first, it flickers wildly, touched by every draft of thought, every breeze of worry. But as I settle, the flame steadies. That's what our minds can become. A calm flame, still, clear, illuminating the room without burning it down. Takes time. It takes kindness toward ourselves when we forget and fall back into old patterns. But every time we pause, we're practicing. Every time we choose breath over blame, we're rewiring. And every time we let go of a clenched jaw or soften our voice just a little, we are healing ourselves and those around us. Visualize this. Someone sitting in meditation, eyes closed, the morning light streaming through a window. Inside their chest, a flame glows, not raging, but warm and steady. Outside, the leaves rustle gently in the wind. The world still turns, but the storm inside has stilled. Let that be you. Let this be the reminder you carry into your day. You are not your anger. You are the awareness holding it with compassion. You are not the fire. You are the light. And even on days when you forget, when the flame flares too fast and too fierce, there is always the next breath, the next morning, the next moment. It is never too late to begin again, just like the lotus that blooms after the storm. Chapter 3. You are the sky, not the storm. A Buddhist teaching for morning meditation. I used to think my feelings were facts. If I felt anxious, it meant something terrible was going to happen. If I felt lonely, it meant I was unloved. If I felt angry, it meant someone else had wronged me. I used to live inside those emotions, like rooms with no doors, trapped, spinning, believing each one was the whole truth. But somewhere along the path, maybe it was during a silent retreat, or maybe just in the quiet ache after a difficult goodbye, I heard a sentence that cracked something open. You are the sky. Everything else is just weather. At first, I didn't understand. But one morning, I sat under a Bodhi tree in a quiet garden, the kind of place where time feels slower and the air has a softness to it. I looked up and I saw clouds. Some were light and wispy, others were dark and swollen. And I realized, no matter what passed across that sky, the sky itself never changed. It held them all. It was not angry because a storm rolled in. It was not depressed when the clouds blocked the sun. It simply remained, vast, open, and untouched. That's what Buddhist teachings invite us to remember. We are not our emotions. We are the awareness that watches them. But let me tell you a story, because these teachings are not just beautiful, they're painfully real when we live them. There was a young woman I once knew. Let's call her Lynn. She carried her feelings like waves inside a teacup. Small things could tip her world. A friend not texting back. A critical word from her boss. Even just the wrong kind of silence in a conversation. She would spiral quickly, deeply, into stories about being unloved, unseen, not enough. I wish I could be like you, she once told me, tears in her eyes. So peaceful, so calm. I smiled gently. I'm not always calm, but I've learned to sit beside the storm. She looked at me, puzzled. So I shared what I now share with you. I told her to imagine she's sitting in a quiet theater. The lights dim. A movie begins. On screen, a character, a version of her, is crying, overwhelmed, lost in thought. The music swells. The emotions rise. Now pause. She has two choices. She can jump into the screen, lose herself in the drama, forget she's watching a film, or she can stay in her seat, feel the emotion, witness it. But remember, she is not the screen. Buddha taught that the mind is like a river ever flowing. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall. But the one who watches, the one who observes with compassion, that is where true freedom lives. Lynn began a small practice. Each morning, before touching her phone, she would light a single candle, sit for 5 minutes, and just watch her thoughts like clouds. Some mornings, the sky was bright, hopeful, easy. Other days, it stormed. Old memories, harsh judgments, worries about money, love, purpose. But she kept watching, and slowly something shifted. She began to name her feelings with gentleness, like greeting old friends. Ah, here's sadness. Here comes irritation. That's fear, knocking again. She didn't try to push them away. She didn't invite them to stay forever either. She just acknowledged them and let them pass. That's what emotional detachment is in Buddhism. Not numbness, not indifference, but space. Space between the feeling and the self. A moment of breathing room between what happens and how we respond. Like the sky, allowing clouds to pass without clinging to any of them. Sometimes I think of it like this. Imagine you're walking in a garden and it begins to rain. Would you scream at the sky? Would you believe the rain is a personal attack? Or would you find shelter, wait it out, maybe even enjoy the sound of droplets on the leaves? Emotions are the same. They come, they go, but they are not you. In my own journey, I've learned to journal through these moments, to write what I feel without trying to fix it. Just the act of putting it down makes it lighter. Sometimes I write things like, "There's a storm in my chest today. I don't know why, but I'm breathing through it. I feel heavy, like I'm walking underwater, but I know this will pass. Anger came to visit. I offered it tea instead of a fight." There's something about seeing the words that helps me step out of the story. Breath work helps too. Not dramatic breaths, but quiet, intentional ones. Like the soft rise and fall of a sleeping child's chest. Inhale, like welcoming a friend. Exhale, like letting go of a tight grip. One breath, then another. Each one a tiny return to peace. Over time, this practice becomes a way of living. When someone cuts you off in traffic, when your child throws a tantrum, when you read a comment online that pierces something tender, you feel it, yes, but you don't have to drown in it. You can pause, watch, let it drift by, and sometimes, on really beautiful days, you can even smile at it, like an old companion passing through. In the early morning, when the world hasn't rushed in yet, I like to sit quietly and imagine myself as the sky, boundless, open, holding whatever arises. Birdsong, welcome. Sadness, let it float. A memory from long ago, let it visit, then leave. And as I sit, I remind myself, I am not my anger. I am not my worry. I am not even my joy. I am the sky that holds them all and lets them pass in their own time. There's something powerful about that kind of presence. It doesn't shout. It doesn't grip. It just is. And that's enough. So if today you feel like a storm is rising within you, if your heart is heavy or your thoughts are spinning, pause. Look up. Let the sky remind you of who you truly are. You are not the passing clouds. You are not the rain. You are the one who watches, the one who breathes, the one who lets go. And in that letting go, you return home, again and again, like a lotus blooming at the edge of a still pond. Quiet, rooted, radiant. Chapter 4. The What-If Mirror, Turning Reaction into Reflection. Buddhist teaching for morning meditation. I used to believe that people's words had the power to define me, that a careless comment or a glance filled with judgment could crumble my self-worth. But one day, I asked a different question, a quiet, almost trembling whisper in my chest. What if it's not really about me? And that was the beginning of something soft, something freeing. It was a rainy morning when this shift first bloomed in me. The kind of rain that's steady and slow, like the sky is weeping gently for something long forgotten. I sat in my favorite corner of the garden at a small temple retreat. A steaming cup of tea warmed my palms. Around me, petals from a cherry blossom tree drifted down in silence, mixing with raindrops like tears that no longer needed explanation. That morning, I overheard someone speaking sharply about me. They didn't know I was within earshot. Their words were not cruel, not shouting, but they carried judgment, assumptions, misunderstandings. In the past, that would have pierced straight through me. My body would tighten, the breath would shallow, and my mind would gallop toward defensiveness, resentment, perhaps even retaliation. But instead, I breathed. What if they're going through something I don't see? What if their words come from a place of pain, not truth? What if this moment is meant to teach me patience, not bitterness? I let the questions hang in the air, like wind chimes that sing not in spite of the wind, but because of it. There's something gentle about asking, what if? Isn't there? It doesn't accuse. It doesn't attack. It invites. It creates a pause between the trigger and our response. A sacred breath, a tiny space where awareness can live. In that space, compassion can enter, curiosity, clarity, and maybe even peace. I later learned that this method, the what-if reflection, is not new. It echoes something deeply Buddhist, though in a subtle way. When the Buddha taught mindfulness, he wasn't only asking us to observe what we feel. He was asking us to ask deeper questions. He was teaching us to see clearly, to peer beneath the surface of emotion and find the riverbed of understanding flowing beneath. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, "All that we are is the result of what we have thought." What if that includes what we choose to believe about others too? Let me tell you a story. There was a young student named Lean, one of the most sensitive souls I've ever met. She studied in a prestigious university where competition buzzed like a hive. One day, during a group presentation, she was criticized by a classmate in front of everyone. His tone was dismissive and his words cut sharp. Later, in tears, she came to me. "Why would he say that? I worked so hard. I feel so small now." I sat beside her under the Bodhi tree behind the meditation hall. The leaves danced softly above us, and I asked her, "What if he wasn't trying to hurt you?" She looked at me, confused. I continued, "What if he was scared he wouldn't stand out unless he pushed others down? What if his comment was not about your worth, but about his fear?" Her eyes softened. Her shoulders fell just slightly. The tension eased. That was the beginning of her practice. She started keeping a small journal. Whenever she felt hurt, instead of reacting, she'd pause and write, "What if this pain is pointing to something unhealed in me? What if they're having a bad day? What if I don't need to carry this weight?" This small act of shifting from reaction to reflection became her ritual. Over time, the anger lessened. Her empathy grew. She still felt pain sometimes, but she no longer let it own her. Imagine this, a lake at dawn. The water is glass, still and reflective. Someone throws a stone, it makes a splash. But eventually, the ripples fade, and the lake returns to calm. That is what the what-if mindset gives us. Not immunity from life's disruptions, but the power to return gently to stillness. One morning, not long ago, I practiced this in a coffee shop. A barista was rushed and sharp with her tone. My first reaction? Offense. What did I do? But then I paused. What if she's running behind on rent? What if someone she loves is sick? What if my smile could be the one soft moment in her otherwise harsh day? So instead of matching her tone, I offered kindness. "Rough morning," I said lightly. She blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, it's been a lot. Sometimes that's all people need. Not a solution, just a moment of grace." Buddhist wisdom reminds us that we are not here to change others. We're here to liberate ourselves from the chains of reactivity, to transform the battlefield of the mind into a field of blooming lotus flowers. And here's something gentle to try. The next time someone says something that stings, pause, feel your breath, then ask, what if this moment is not about blame but growth? What if there's a deeper story I haven't heard? What if my peace is more important than being right? Keep asking, keep breathing. Let the questions be your lantern through the fog. You see, the practice of Buddhism is not about never feeling. It's about feeling with awareness. And the what-if mindset is one of the most compassionate tools we can carry, like a folded paper umbrella in our pocket, ready to open gently in the storm. I want to leave you with one final image. Picture a handwritten page, aged, soft at the edges, filled with what-if questions written in careful strokes. It rests on an altar next to a small candle. As the flame flickers, it casts light onto each line, not burning it away, but illuminating it. This, to me, is what healing looks like. Not erasure, but understanding. Not forgetting the pain, but learning to hold it with tenderness. As you go into your day, or settle into the evening's quiet, I invite you to ask, not with judgment, but with wonder, what if this moment is the teacher I've been waiting for? What if I am becoming something softer, wiser, freer, right now? And most importantly, what if I already am? Chapter 5, The Still Lake Within, Buddhist Teaching for Morning Meditation on Emotional Sovereignty. There's a certain silence in the early morning, the kind that doesn't feel empty, but sacred. Have you ever felt it? When the world is still rubbing the sleep from its eyes, and the only sounds are the breath of wind, the hum of distant birds, or the gentle rustling of leaves, almost like the earth itself is meditating. I used to miss this silence. Back then, my mornings were an alarm clock battle, a clumsy race through coffee cups, and an inbox waiting to remind me of everything I hadn't done. I thought productivity was purpose, and response was obligation. If someone snapped at me, I snapped back. If someone ignored me, I collapsed into overthinking. Every word, every look from others. Somehow, it always felt like it had power over me. Until one day, a teacher asked me something that quietly pierced my whole perception. "Who owns your mind?" she said while pouring tea. I blinked. "I guess I do." She smiled, warm but amused. "Then why?" she whispered. "Do you let everyone else live in it?" That question stayed with me longer than her tea did. And slowly, I began to realize that the emotional storms I thought were caused by others weren't. They were mine. There's a Buddhist metaphor I return to again and again, especially in the early morning when I sit on my cushion and the world hasn't quite awakened yet. It says the mind is like a still lake. Thoughts, feelings, reactions, those are the ripples. And when someone throws a stone at the water, an insult, a disappointment, a loss, we feel the disturbance. But here's the quiet truth the Buddha taught. We don't have to hold onto that stone. Let it pass through. Let it sink. But don't carry it. When we cling to the stone, we disturb the lake endlessly. But when we let go, when we simply observe the ripple, the water returns to stillness on its own. There was once a practitioner, let's call her Amina, who came to the monastery after a particularly harsh falling out with her sister. Hurtful words were exchanged, some of them deep, personal jabs that cut beneath the surface. She had come to the temple not to find answers, but to escape the noise. At dawn, she joined the morning meditation. The hall was quiet, just the sound of breath, the faint tick of the incense clock, and the occasional shifting of robes. But inside Amina's mind, a storm. She replayed the words again and again. "You never listen. You always make everything about you." The accusations echoed in her mind like thunder. Her fists were clenched, breath shallow. That was when the teacher stepped softly beside her and, instead of correcting her posture, simply whispered, "Watch the lake, not the stone." Amina opened her eyes slightly, confused at first, but the words settled, not like advice, but like a soft bell ringing in her heart. She closed her eyes again, and this time she imagined a lake, a wide, deep lake beneath a moonlit sky. She pictured the words her sister had said, saw them like stones hurled toward the surface. She watched them break the stillness, and then she watched the ripples fade. She didn't argue with the thoughts. She didn't suppress them. She simply observed. She sat with her pain, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a visitor to be understood. And in that act of gentle witnessing, something within her began to soften. Buddhist practice isn't about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming undisturbed. Emotional sovereignty doesn't mean we never feel hurt. It means we don't hand over the keys to our peace. It means we choose not react. It means we pause, breathe, and respond from wisdom, not wounds. It's not easy, especially not when the world expects us to be quick, witty, reactive. Social media thrives on outrage. Conversations are often competitions of who speaks louder, not who listens deeper. But in the stillness of morning, away from all the noise, we remember. We are not our reactions. We are not what others think of us. We are not the stones. We are the lake. There's a mantra I carry with me into meditation now. Simple but quietly powerful. I choose my response. I say it to myself before difficult conversations, before opening that email, before answering the phone. It's a gentle reminder that no matter what chaos arrives at the shores of my life, I have the capacity to remain calm, not cold, just centered. This too is compassion. For myself, for others, because when I don't immediately react from pain, I don't pass that pain on. That's how emotional sovereignty ripples outward, like moonlight across the water. Quiet but undeniable. There was a man I once met who practiced this teaching in the most unexpected way. He was a street vendor, selling tea from a small cart near the river. Every morning, same smile, same steaming cups. I passed him for weeks without really noticing, until one day, a customer shouted at him, loud, rude, accused him of overcharging even though the price was right there. I braced for conflict, but the man simply bowed gently and said, "I hope your day becomes lighter." No sarcasm, no defensiveness, just stillness. Later, I asked him how he did it. He chuckled. "I used to get angry. Every word stuck to me like glue. But one morning, I started watching the river while boiling water, and I realized, no matter how many leaves fall into it, the river keeps flowing." He handed me my tea. Why should I stop flowing just because someone else is carrying a storm? You see, we don't practice sovereignty to be superior. We practice it to be free, to wake up in the morning and not be a puppet pulled by old strings, to breathe deeply and not be owned by an email, to receive harsh words and not let them rewrite our worth. Because here's the thing the Buddha gently taught. No one can make you feel small unless you forget your true nature. And your true nature is vast, still, deep, like a moonlit lake. So, tomorrow morning, or maybe right now, find a quiet spot. Light a candle if you like. Sit down softly, as if greeting yourself for the first time. Close your eyes. Picture the lake. Let whatever comes, come. Let whatever goes, go. No judgment, just watch. And when the mind offers you stories, emotions, or old echoes of pain, whisper gently, "I choose my response, because this life, this precious, fleeting, beautiful life, it's far too sacred to live at the mercy of someone else's storm. You are the sky. You are the stillness beneath the ripple. You are the moon on the water. And you, dear one, are free." 7. Emotional alchemy, turning anger into gold. Buddhist teaching for morning meditation. I used to think anger was fire that had to be put out, quickly, forcefully, completely, until one day, it burned me so deeply, I realized it was trying to light a different kind of flame. It happened during a conversation I wasn't ready for. Words flew faster than breath, and something small, a missed appointment, I think, became something volcanic. My voice rose before my awareness could catch it, and in the silent aftermath, I looked at the person in front of me, not as an enemy, but as someone who had simply touched a wound I hadn't healed. That was the beginning of a shift I didn't expect, when I started to see anger not as a villain, but as a raw material, something holy in its own way, something that, if treated with respect and stillness, could become gold. You see, in Buddhist teachings, we are not taught to suppress anger. That only buries it deeper, where it grows hotter. We are not taught to indulge it either, that leads to harm. Instead, we are invited to witness it, breathe with it, and, over time, transform it. Anger is energy, pure, potent, and pulsing. When met with mindfulness, it can become clarity. When held with compassion, it can become courage. It's not the fire that destroys, but the fire that forges. There's a story I love about the Buddha, not as a serene statue, but as a human being, once provoked, tested, and deeply misunderstood. One day, a man approached him, furious, yelling insults. The Buddha simply looked at him with calm eyes and said, "If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man stood stunned. His anger met not with more anger, but with spaciousness. The Buddha did not suppress his emotion. He simply didn't absorb the man's fury as his own. That's emotional alchemy. Now imagine this, a small pottery studio at dusk, candles flickering on a wooden shelf, the scent of earth and clay in the air. A woman sits at the wheel, tears still drying on her cheeks. She's just come from a heartbreak. A relationship she gave everything to has ended. The ache in her chest is fresh and fiery. But instead of texting or pacing or numbing herself in distractions, She pours that ache into her hands. She shapes it, presses it, breathes with it. Hour after hour, she molds her anger and grief into form, into bowls, into vases, into vessels. Weeks pass. Her studio fills with quiet beauty. This is what it means to turn anger into art. Not just on a wheel, but in the way we speak, the way we live, the way we rise from pain. So often, we are afraid of our anger because we've only seen what it looks like when it's out of control. But what if anger wasn't a flaw, but a signal? A signal that something in us still longs to be seen, to be healed, to be heard? When a child throws a tantrum, we know they're not evil, they're overwhelmed. The same is true for us adults. Beneath every flare of anger, there's usually a younger part of us. Scared, unheard, exhausted, maybe even heartbroken. Can you feel that? The next time anger rises like a storm in your chest, I invite you to pause, not to suppress it, but to turn toward it like a teacher. Ask it, what are you trying to protect? What wound are you guarding? Then breathe, slowly, intentionally. Feel your breath as a cooling balm over the fire. Each inhale is a hand over your heart. Each exhale is a letting go, not of the truth, but of the story that you must fight to be worthy. Remember, anger is raw metal. When ignored, it rusts. When overused, it cuts. But when placed in the fire of presence and hammered by compassion, it becomes gold, resilient, warm, and forged in truth. A friend of mine once said, "Anger showed me where I had boundaries I never knew existed." That stayed with me, because it's true. Anger is often the first voice of your inner wisdom, just spoken in a louder tone. So what if we listened before it had to shout? There's something sacred in this practice. Not glamorous, not easy, but sacred. It starts with small, ordinary moments. You're cut off in traffic. Your partner forgets to call. Your child spills something again, and suddenly heat rises. You want to explode, but instead of reacting, you feel your feet on the ground. You notice the breath. You say silently, "This too is energy." And just like that, you shift the pattern. From fire to stillness. From reaction to transformation. In time, this becomes your art form. Your emotional gold. Let me leave you with this image. A statue of the Buddha sculpted from black stone sits in the garden, surrounded by lotus blossoms. Morning light dances on his face. A child walks up, tears in her eyes, and places a small clay pot, shaped by her own hands, at his feet. The pot is uneven, imperfect, but beautiful. This is you. This is me. We are all learning to shape the fire into something worthy of offering. And if you ever forget that, just look at a candle. This flame does not scream. It simply glows. Soft, steady, golden. Just like you. Chapter 6T. The Power of Silence, Non-Reaction as Strength Buddhist Teaching for Morning Meditation. There was a time in my life when I believed that the loudest voice won. That to protect myself, I had to speak up, fight back, prove a point. But one evening, something changed all of that. I found myself sitting beside an old monk in a mountain temple, surrounded by cicadas and the hush of pine trees. And he said, with the gentlest smile, "Sometimes, silence is the deepest answer you can give." I didn't understand it then, but over time, those words took root. And this story is about how silence, true, aware, grounded silence, became not my weakness, but my greatest strength. It begins, like most things do, with pain. Let me tell you about Lin and Min, a couple married for nearly a decade. From the outside, their life looked peaceful. Shared cups of tea, laughter in the kitchen, a little garden full of basil and morning glories. But inside, especially behind closed doors, tension simmered. Small things became sharp. Forgotten chores, differences in opinion, the quiet exhaustion of raising two children while trying to stay kind to each other. Min, in particular, carried a temper that flared easily. His childhood had taught him that silence meant defeat, that if you didn't speak up right away, you'd be ignored or worse, dismissed. Lin, on the other hand, had learned from her own upbringing to shut down and disappear during conflict. So when fights began, they would spiral. His voice rising, hers fading, and each time, they left more hurt than healing. Until one day, something unusual happened. They were in the middle of an argument about something trivial, who forgot to pick up the groceries, perhaps, when, just as Min raised his voice, Lin simply paused. She didn't respond, didn't walk away, didn't cry. She just sat in silence, not stonewalling, not giving the cold shoulder, just breathing quietly, her eyes soft but clear. Min froze. It was as if her silence held up a mirror to his own noise. He could suddenly hear himself, the anger, the volume, the pain underneath it all, and something in him softened. The room, once charged, felt different. That night, they talked not about the groceries, but about the cycle. And from that day forward, they made a simple agreement. Before any response, they would take 10 seconds of silence. Just 10 seconds. A breath. A return to center. A pause long enough to shift from reacting to responding. In Buddhism, silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the presence of awareness. There's a Zen story that speaks to this beautifully. A student once asked his master, "How can I find peace in the midst of insults and aggression?" The master replied, "When someone offers you a gift and you don't take it, who does the gift belong to?" The student blinked. "The one who tried to give it." The master smiled. And that's what silence often is. Not a retreat, but a choice. A refusal to carry what was never yours to hold. When I first began practicing silence in moments of conflict, it felt unnatural, like giving up. But over time, I discovered its quiet power. I remember one morning in particular. I had just wrapped up a meeting that left me drained. A colleague had spoken sharply, questioning my work with a tone that felt more like an attack than a suggestion. My first instinct was to write a defensive email. I even drafted it, but something in me whispered, "Not yet." Instead, I stepped outside. The morning air was cool, touched with the scent of dew and jasmine. I walked slowly, listening to the birds, watching the light filter through the trees. I breathed, and in that pause, I realized something important. Her words weren't really about me. She was struggling with pressure, with fear. She didn't need my retaliation. She needed compassion. I deleted the email. Later that week, she apologized, awkwardly but sincerely, and I knew I had done the right thing. Not by being the bigger person in an egoic way, but by honoring the stillness inside me. Silence is not about being passive. It's about being conscious. It's the space in which we can listen not just to others, but to ourselves. In today's world, where so much noise surrounds us, notifications, opinions, urgency, it's tempting to believe that every moment must be filled. But some of the most powerful truths arrive only in stillness. Think of a pond. When stirred, it becomes murky. But when left untouched, it reflects the sky. Our minds are like that. There's a small Buddhist temple nestled in the hills of northern Vietnam. In its courtyard stands an ancient Bodhi tree, and beneath it, a bell, smooth, bronze, time-worn. Monks there follow a simple practice. Every time the bell rings, they stop whatever they're doing and breathe. Just one breath. It's a ritual of presence, a moment to return. Sometimes I imagine that bell when I feel tension rise in my chest. A silent ringing inside that calls me back. Back to breath. Back to clarity. Back to love. And isn't that what silence really is? A return. Not to weakness, but to wisdom. To the part of us that knows, not everything must be said. Not every wound must be defended. Not every moment demands a reply. Some things, when met with stillness, unravel on their own. Some battles dissolve in the absence of resistance. Some relationships deepen when we offer space instead of words. If you've ever found yourself caught in a spiral, an argument that leaves you hollow, a moment of anger you couldn't pull back from, maybe this is the invitation. Try it just once. The next time someone pushes your buttons, pauses are possible. Let their words pass like wind through bamboo. Let your breath be the anchor. Let your silence be your strength. And in that space, you might just hear something deeper. The voice of your own wisdom, the echo of compassion, the stillness where peace begins. Chapter 7, Grace Under Pressure, Equanimity in Everyday Life Buddhist Teaching for Morning Meditation. I used to think strength looked like control, like holding everything together with tight fists and a calm, unflinching face. But one rainy afternoon, watching a leaf tremble at the edge of a tree before falling gently to the ground, I learned something else entirely. True strength, I realized, is the ability to remain soft in the middle of a storm. Not to resist the wind, but to move with it. Not to suppress the waves of feeling, but to float, to breathe, to stay. That's what equanimity is. Not indifference, not stoicism, but a deep, steady stillness in the middle of chaos. A tree that bends but doesn't break. A candle that flickers but keeps burning. And the truth is, this isn't something reserved for monks or sages. It's for us. For the mother with 2 crying children in her arms. For the worker facing deadlines and unfair pressure. For the person navigating grief while smiling through the day. It's for you. For me. Let me tell you a story. A simple one. One that could belong to any of us. There was a woman named Lean, a quiet soul who worked as a nurse in a crowded hospital. Her days were filled with emergencies. Alarms beeping, patients moaning, doctors shouting orders. She had 3 children at home, a husband recovering from a layoff, and bills stacking like autumn leaves on her kitchen table. Yet, each morning, before the sun rose, Lean would sit quietly on the floor by her window. She would light a small candle, close her eyes, and breathe. Just 10 minutes, sometimes less. Sometimes the breath came jagged, shaky, but she showed up, again and again. One day, a younger nurse asked her, "How do you stay so calm, even when everything is falling apart?" Lean smiled gently and said, "I don't stay calm, I return to it." There's a great Buddhist phrase that says, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." That's the essence of equanimity, not controlling life, but changing our posture in the face of it. I remember a moment when I truly understood this. I was standing in a crowded airport. My flight had been canceled. My phone was dying. Everyone around me was angry, pacing, yelling at the counter staff, and I could feel the tension rising in my chest too. But then I remembered the teachings. I placed one hand over my heart, breathed in slowly, and thought, "This too shall pass," not as a way to dismiss the discomfort, but as a way to stay with it, to soften into the moment instead of fighting it. You see, equanimity is not the absence of feeling. It's the capacity to hold feeling without being consumed by it. Imagine you're standing at the edge of a still lake. The surface reflects the sky like a mirror. Now imagine someone throws a stone into the water. An insult, a setback, a piece of news that breaks your heart. The ripples come. That's natural. But in time, the lake becomes still again. That's you. That's your mind, your heart, capable of stillness again and again. Buddha taught us, as a solid rock is not shaken by the wind, so the wise are not shaken by praise or blame. Think of that in daily life. You're driving through traffic, someone cuts you off. Your child spills juice on your one clean shirt. A colleague questions your idea in a meeting. Your partner forgets something important to you. In these micro moments, we are offered invitations not to react, but to return. Return to the breath. Return to the space between stimulus and response. That tiny space is where freedom lives. I remember my grandmother used to pause before speaking when she was angry. Just a small pause. I didn't understand it as a child, but now I see it was sacred. It was grace. Grace is not grand. Sometimes it's just a quiet inhale, or the decision to listen instead of lash out, or the gentle question you ask yourself, is this worth my peace? And peace, by the way, doesn't mean you always feel good. Sometimes peace feels like sadness with soft edges. Sometimes it's disappointment held in warm palms. Sometimes it's crying in the shower and still making dinner after. Peace is not a performance, it's a presence. And equanimity, grace under pressure, is the inner temple where peace rests. So how do we practice this? Start small. Before a meeting, before a difficult conversation, before a storm hits. Pause, breathe, touch your heart or your belly. Feel your feet on the ground. Let the body remember it's safe. Make equanimity a ritual. Light a candle. Whisper a mantra. This moment is not forever. I can meet this with presence. Nothing needs fixing right now. Use reminders, a bracelet, a note on your mirror, a gentle bell on your phone every few hours, inviting you to return. And most importantly, be kind to yourself when you forget. You will snap. You will overreact. You will lose your balance. That's okay. The practice is not about perfection. It's about return. Always return. Just like Lean, the nurse. Just like the still lake. Just like the trees after a storm. There's one more story I want to share with you. It's not mine, but it stayed with me. In a small monastery in Japan, a student asked the Zen master, "What is the most important teaching?" The master paused and replied, "Let everything come. Let everything go." The student frowned. "That's it." The master smiled. "That is everything. So next time the world presses in, when the noise gets too loud, when your patience thins, when your hands tremble or your heart breaks, remember, you are the sky, not the weather. You are the stillness beneath the waves. And inside you is a grace that no storm can steal. Even now, as you listen to this, feel your breath again. Like the tide, like the wind through pine trees, like the rise and fall of your own becoming. You're doing better than you think. And somewhere, in this very moment, a candle is flickering gently in the dark. A bough is bending but not breaking. A lotus is rising from the mud. That lotus is you. In the end, no one truly makes us feel anything. They offer words, glances, energy, but the meaning, that's ours to choose, ours to carry or let go. So the next time someone throws a stone into your inner lake, pause, breathe, watch the ripples, and remember, you are not the stone. You are not even the ripple. You are the stillness underneath it all. Like a candle that doesn't fight the darkness. It simply glows, like the sky that watches every storm, then clears without holding on. I wonder, what words have you been carrying that no longer belong to you? Would you be willing to set them down today? If this story stirred something in you, I invite you to share your thoughts below. What part of your peace are you reclaiming? And if you'd like to walk this gentle path with me, one breath, one story at a time, press subscribe. This isn't just a channel. It's a quiet corner of the world where we remember who we really are. See you in the next video, dear friend.